In 1939, the United States had an army smaller than Portugal's and an economy still shivering from the Great Depression. By 1945, it produced nearly 2/3 of all Allied military equipment and mobilized over 16 million troops. This transformation was the result of 48 states and several territories dedicating their specific resources, whether iron, wheat, or blood, to a singular cause. We are ranking every state based on a composite of their tangible contribution: military manpower, industrial output, and strategic geography. We're starting from the smallest contributors and working our way up to the industrial titans that forged the victory. Before we start though, please note that during World War II, the United States was only comprised of 48 states. Our ranking begins at 53 because we also included territories controlled by the United States during World War II, but are currently, as of writing in 2026, not yet full-fledged states. '52. Nevada. Nevada held the smallest population of any state in 1940, which naturally limited its manpower contribution. However, its contribution was chemically explosive. The state became a crucial source of magnesium, a metal essential for building lightweight aircraft parts and incendiary bombs. The basic magnesium plant in Henderson produced millions of pounds of this miracle metal, effectively turning a desert outpost into a vital industrial asset. 51. Wyoming. Wyoming contributed through its rich natural resources and a high per capita enlistment rate. The state's oil fields fueled the tanks and planes of the military, while its coal mines kept the steel mills of the Midwest burning. Wyoming suffered 652 casualties, a significant loss for a state with such a low population density. 50. Vermont. Vermont was a machine tool state. While its casualty counts of 874 is low in absolute terms, the state's contribution to precision manufacturing was irreplaceable. The town of Springfield, Vermont, was so vital to the production of precision gears and lathes that it was ranked as a top-tier target for German bombers by the Luftwaffe. Without these high-precision tools, the mass production of engines in Detroit would have ground to a halt. 49. North Dakota. North Dakota's economy was overwhelmingly agrarian, and with no major defense industries to keep men at home, they enlisted in droves. The state suffered 1,626 casualties, a number that devastated its small rural communities. Those who stayed behind engaged in a production war of their own, breaking harvest records to feed a starving Europe. North Dakota exemplifies the quiet sacrifice of the American heartland. 48. South Dakota. Like its northern neighbor, South Dakota served as a breadbasket of democracy. Farmers increased production despite a severe labor shortage caused by 11% of the entire state population enlisting in the armed forces. The state also served as a massive classroom for the Army Air Forces. The Sioux Falls Army Airfields was one of the primary radio schools in the country, training tens of thousands of radio operators who became the lifeline of bomber crews over Europe. 47. Delaware. Delaware punches above its weight due to a single corporate giant, DuPont. This chemical company, headquartered in Wilmington, was instrumental in the production of explosives and synthetic materials. They produced billions of pounds of smokeless powder and TNT, effectively keeping the Allied guns firing when British stockpiles ran low. The state's shipyards in Wilmington also churned out landing craft and destroyer escorts essential for the Atlantic convoys. 46. New Hampshire. New Hampshire's contribution was maritime. The Portsmouth Naval Yard, located on the border with Maine, was a hive of submarine construction. This yard built over 30 submarines during the war, vessels that wreaked havoc on Japanese shipping lines in the Pacific. The textile mills in Manchester also shifted gears to produce uniforms and parachutes ensuring that paratroopers were clothed and equipped for the drop. 45. Utah. Utah played a pivotal role in the air war. Wendover Field, located on the Salt Flats, was the secret training site for the 509th Composite Group, the unit that dropped the atomic bombs. The isolation of the state made it the perfect place to practice the most sensitive mission of the war. Additionally, Utah hosted Hill Field, a major supply and maintenance depot that kept the Air Force flying. 44. Montana. Montana was the Copper King. The mines in Butte produced a staggering amount of copper, a metal required for everything from bullet casings to the wiring in battleships. The demand was so high that the government had to balance drafting miners with keeping them underground to maintain production. 43. Arizona. Arizona offered the military a unique environment, the desert. General George Patton established the Desert Training Center here, a massive maneuver area where troops prepared for the invasion of North Africa. The state also gave the Marines their most secure communication tool, the Navajo Code Talkers. Recruited from the Navajo Nation in Arizona, these men developed a code that the Japanese never broke. 42. Mississippi. Mississippi served as a primary training ground for the Deep South. The state hosted numerous army camps and airfields, leveraging its climate for year-round operations. The state's contribution was heavily weighted in manpower, sending its sons from rural farms to the front lines while hosting the massive infrastructure needed to build an army from scratch. 41. Alaska. Alaska holds a unique distinction as the only part of the continent occupied by Axis forces. When Japan invaded the Aleutian Islands, American troops fought in freezing slush to reclaim their own soil. But Alaska's true value was a bridge to the Soviet Union. It served as the spine of the Al-Sib air route, where pilots handed off nearly 8,000 Lend-Lease aircraft to the Soviets. To support this, the army bulldozed the Alaska Highway through 1,500 miles of wilderness, permanently connecting the territory to the nation. 40. New Mexico. New Mexico's ranking is defined by extreme sacrifice and top-secret science. The state's 200th Coast Artillery was deployed to the Philippines and forced into the Bataan Death March, causing the state to suffer a disproportionately high casualty rate. Meanwhile, the state hosted the Manhattan Project at Los Alamos. While the atomic bomb ended the war, it was a federal project isolated from the state's general economy, keeping New Mexico's overall ranking lower than the industrial giants. 39. Idaho. Idaho sits 1,000 miles from the ocean, yet it hosted the second largest naval training center in the world. The Farragut Naval Training Station, built on the shores of Lake Pend Oreille, processed nearly 300,000 sailors. This landlocked state effectively taught the US Navy how to swim. Beyond training, Idaho's mines provided lead and zinc essential for munitions, while its farmers worked overtime to feed the troops. 38. Arkansas. Arkansas provided the raw materials for the fight. The state was a major producer of bauxite, the ore used to make aluminium. With foreign supply lines threatened by U-boats, Arkansas bauxite became critical for the aircraft industry. The state also hosted the Pine Bluff Arsenal, which manufactured incendiary grenades and chemical weapons, adding a lethal edge to the American arsenal. 37. Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico served as the Gibraltar of the Caribbean, guarding the Panama Canal from German U-boats. The Navy transformed the island into a massive fortress, ensuring the safety of American trade and troop movements. On top of that, Puerto Rico contributed the Borinquenes, a segregated infantry regiment that fought in Europe. With over 65,000 troops mobilized, the island proved that American patriotism extended far beyond the continental mainland. 36. Rhode Island. Rhode Island, the smallest state, punched significantly above its weight class in naval warfare. It hosted the Naval War College in Newport, the intellectual center where the strategy for the Pacific War was refined. The state was also a key manufacturing hub, producing a massive percentage of the torpedoes used by US submarines. 35. Florida. Florida transformed into a massive aircraft carrier during the war. Its flat terrain and year-round flying weather made it the perfect major air training hub. Thousands of pilots earned their wings in Florida skies before deploying to Europe. Strategically, Florida was also the front line of the Caribbean defense. With German U-boats prowling the Atlantic coast and the Gulf of Mexico, the state's bases were critical for anti-submarine warfare. 34. Colorado. Colorado offered the Army a unique terrain for specialized warfare. The state hosted Camp Hale, the training ground for the 10th Mountain Division. Here, soldiers learned to fight on skis and survive in sub-zero temperatures, skills that proved critical during the battle in the Italian Alps. 33. South Carolina. South Carolina was where the tip of the spear was sharpened. The state is synonymous with Parris Island, the legendary Marine Corps recruit depot. Tens of thousands of Marines endured their basic training here before shipping out to Guadalcanal, Tarawa, and Iwo Jima. 32. District of Columbia. While not a state, Washington, D.C. served as the brain of the Allied war effort. The city underwent a massive physical transformation, culminating in the rapid construction of the Pentagon, the largest office building in the world, to house the exploding military bureaucracy. The city's population swelled with hundreds of thousands of clerks, planners, and government girls who managed the logistics of a global war. 31. Nebraska. Nebraska served as the precursor to America's strategic air power. The state hosted vital aviation infrastructure that laid the groundwork for what would become the Strategic Air Command. Its flat plains were ideal for airfields and bomber production facilities. With nearly 3,000 casualties, Nebraska's contribution was a mix of high enlistment from its agricultural communities and the development of the air power that would eventually define the Cold War era. 30. Oregon. Oregon's contribution was dominated by the shipbuilding industry. The state's shipyards, particularly those along the Columbia and Willamette rivers, saw a massive influx of labor to build Liberty ships and aircraft carriers. This shipbuilding labor impact transformed the state's economy and demographics permanently, drawing thousands of workers to the Pacific Northwest to build the bridge of ships that supplied the war. 29. Maine. Maine's contribution was forged in the cold waters of the North Atlantic. The state became a hub for maritime production, specifically the construction of destroyers. The Bath Iron Works churned out the escort vessels that protected Allied convoys from German U-boats. The state's location made it the final defensive line for the northeastern coast, and its laborers worked around the clock to ensure the bridge of ships to Europe remained unbroken. 28. Kentucky. Kentucky's contribution was explosive. The state was a major center for the production of synthetic rubber, a critical resource after Japan cut off natural rubber supplies from Asia. The plants in Louisville produced neoprene, essential for tires, gas masks, and hoses. Additionally, Fort Knox held the nation's gold reserves, ensuring the financial stability of the US government while serving as the headquarters for the armored force where tank crews learned their trade. 27. Oklahoma. Oklahoma provided the fuel for victory. As a major oil-producing state, it helped float the Allied armies on a sea of petroleum. Beyond oil, the state hosted a massive number of pilot training bases. Tinker Field in Oklahoma City became a crucial maintenance depot for B-17s and B-24s, employing thousands of civilians to keep the bomber fleets operational. 26. Tennessee. Tennessee's contribution was arguably the most consequential of the entire war, the atomic bomb. The secret city of Oak Ridge was built from scratch to house the massive facilities needed to enrich uranium. This site consumed 1/7 of all the electricity generated in the United States at the time. Tens of thousands of workers toiled here, often unaware of what they were building, to create the weapon that would end the war. 25. Iowa. Iowa was the cornucopia of the alliance. As the leading producer of corn and pork, the state's farmers fought a battle against hunger. With millions of men in uniform and allied nations starving, Iowa's record-breaking harvests were as vital as any munitions plant. The state also had a high enlistment rate, with farm boys trading their tractors for tanks, suffering over 5,600 casualties. 24. Louisiana. Louisiana was the staging ground for the invasion of Europe. The Louisiana maneuvers were massive war games involving hundreds of thousands of troops designed to test American doctrine and leadership before they faced the Wehrmacht. Industrially, New Orleans was the home of Higgins Industries, which built the LCVP landing craft. Dwight Eisenhower explicitly stated that Andrew Higgins won the war for us because without his boats, the Allies could not have landed on any beach. 23. Minnesota. Minnesota provided the iron backbone of the war. The Iron Range in the north produced the vast majority of the iron ore used by the US steel industry. Without Minnesota ore, the steel mills in Pennsylvania and Ohio would have gone cold. The state also contributed heavily to food production, specifically dairy and wheat, ensuring the troops were fed. 22. Kansas. Kansas was the heart of the B-29 program. The massive Boeing plant in Wichita produced the Superfortress bombers that carried the war to the Japanese mainland. The state's flat, open terrain also made it a prime location for airfields. Kansas farmers, like their neighbors, produced record wheat harvests, earning the state a dual ranking as a breadbasket and a bomber forge. 21. West Virginia. West Virginia fueled the factories. The state's coal mines were the primary energy source for the industrial Northeast. Coal miners were considered so essential that they were often granted draft deferments, though many enlisted anyway. The state also hosted the Naval Ordnance Plant in South Charleston, which produced gun barrels and armor plates for the US Navy's battleships. 20. Alabama. Alabama was the industrial anchor of the South. Birmingham, known as the Pittsburgh of the South, churned out the steel and iron needed for heavy munitions. Meanwhile, the shipyards in Mobile exploded with activity, launching destroyers and cargo vessels at record pace. The state also hosted the Tuskegee Airmen at Tuskegee Army Airfield, the segregated unit of African American pilots who shattered racial myths while protecting American bombers over Europe. 19. North Carolina. North Carolina's contribution was defined by training and textiles. Fort Bragg expanded into the largest artillery post in the world, training hundreds of thousands of soldiers who would man the biggest guns in Europe. Industrially, the state's textile mills produced the parachutes for the airborne divisions and the uniforms for the entire army. With over 7,000 casualties, North Carolina served as both the tailor and the drill sergeant of the Allied forces. 18. Georgia. Georgia combined heavy industry with massive infantry training. Fort Benning was the home of the infantry, where the core tactics of the US Army were taught to officers and enlisted men alike. On the industrial side, the Bell aircraft plant in Marietta was built from scratch to assemble the massive B-29 Superfortress bombers. This plant alone employed nearly 30,000 workers, transforming the agrarian economy of the region into a high-tech aerospace hub. 17. Maryland. Maryland's contribution was built on speed. The Bethlehem Fairfield shipyard in Baltimore was one of the most productive in the world, famous for building Liberty ships faster than the enemy could sink them. The state also hosted the Edgewood Arsenal, the Center for Chemical Warfare Research and Gas Mask Production. Maryland proved that proximity to the capital wasn't just administrative, but an industrial advantage. 16. Missouri. Missouri provided the ammunition. The St. Louis Ordnance Plant was the world's largest producer of 30 and 50 cal machine gun ammunition, churning out billions of rounds that fed the rifles and aircraft guns of the Allies. The state also produced the gliders for the airborne invasion of Normandy. Missouri's central location and industrial capacity made it the ammo box of the war effort. 15. Virginia. Virginia was the heartbeat of the US Navy. The Newport News Shipbuilding Company produced the massive aircraft carriers including the USS Essex and USS Yorktown, that allowed the US to dominate the Pacific. The Norfolk Naval Base became the world's largest naval installation. On land, the Pentagon was constructed in Arlington to serve as the command center for the global war effort, cementing Virginia's status as the logistical brain of the military. 14. Wisconsin. Wisconsin achieved the impossible, building submarines in the middle of a continent. The Manitowoc Shipbuilding Company on Lake Michigan built 28 submarines that were floated down the Mississippi River to reach the ocean. These freshwater subs sank 132 Japanese ships. Additionally, Allis-Chalmers in Milwaukee built the pumps used to separate uranium from the atomic bomb, while the state's dairy farmers produced the cheese and powdered milk that sustained the troops. 13. Massachusetts. Massachusetts fought the war with technology. The radiation laboratory at MIT developed the microwave radar systems that allowed Allied planes to spot German U-boats and night fighters. This technological edge is often cited as a decisive factor in the victory. The state's Fore shipyard also produced the battleships USS Massachusetts and USS South Dakota. Massachusetts proved that this was a war of physicists as much as soldiers. 12. Connecticut. Connecticut earned the nickname the Arsenal of the Nation. Pratt & Whitney, headquartered in East Hartford, built the Wasp engines that powered the P-47 Thunderbolt and the F-4U Corsair. Without these engines, the Allied air forces would have been grounded. Meanwhile, the Electric Boat Company in Groton produced 74 submarines, the single largest source of the silent service that strangled the Japanese economy. 11. Washington. Washington was the fortress of the Northwest. The Boeing plants in Seattle and Renton were the birthplace of the B-17 Flying Fortress and the B-29 Superfortress, the hammers that destroyed Axis industry. Secretly, the state hosted the Hanford site, where the plutonium for the Nagasaki bomb was produced. Washington's contribution was heavy on strategic bombing and nuclear physics, the two forces that ended the war. 10. Indiana. Indiana was a titan of heavy manufacturing. The steel mills of Gary produced the armor plate for tanks and ships. In South Bend, Studebaker converted its assembly lines to build the heavy-duty 2.5-ton trucks that motorized the Red Army and the US Army. In Evansville, the Republic Aviation Plant built over 6,000 P-47 Thunderbolts. Indiana mobilized its automotive heritage to ensure the Allies were the most mobile army in history. 9. Texas. Texas fueled the war. The state produced 80% of the oil used by the Allies. Without Texas oil, the British fleet and the American Air Force would have stopped moving. The state's vast plains served as the world's largest airbase, hosting dozens of flight training schools. In terms of manpower, Texas contributed a massive number of soldiers, including the famous 36th Infantry Division and Admiral Chester Nimitz, the architect of the Pacific Victory. 8. New Jersey. New Jersey was a diversified industrial giant. The Curtiss Wright plant in Paterson built aircraft engines, while RCA in Camden produced the radio equipment that coordinated Allied movements. The state's chemical industry was vital for explosives and pharmaceuticals. With nearly 13,000 casualties, New Jersey's contribution was a blend of high-tech manufacturing and frontline sacrifice. 7. Ohio. Ohio was the rubber capital of the world. After Japan seized the rubber plantations of Asia, Akron's tire companies miraculously shifted to synthetic rubber production, keeping the Allied armies rolling. Toledo was the birthplace of the Jeep, the vehicle that General Eisenhower listed as one of the 3 tools that won the war. Ohio's diversified manufacturing base produced everything from tank turrets to aircraft parts. 6. California. California became the center of the aerospace universe. The state's aircraft factories, Douglas, Lockheed, North American, produced a staggering percentage of the war's planes. The Kaiser shipyards in Richmond broke records for shipbuilding speed. California also served as the primary staging area for the Pacific War, with millions of troops passing through its ports. The war permanently transformed California from an agricultural state into a technological superpower. 5. Illinois. Illinois ranks third in total casualties with over 18,000 men lost, but its contribution went beyond the battlefield. Chicago was the birthplace of the atomic age, hosting the first controlled nuclear chain reaction at the University of Chicago. Additionally, the Great Lakes Naval Training Station trained 1/3 of the entire US Navy, meaning a sailor fighting in the Pacific was statistically likely to have learned his trade on the shores of Lake Michigan. 4. Hawaii. Hawaii earns a top 5 ranking not because of industrial output, but because of its absolute strategic existence. As the only part of the US under martial law for nearly the entire war, the islands transformed into the unsinkable aircraft carrier of the Pacific. Without Pearl Harbor, the Navy could not have functioned. Furthermore, Hawaii produced the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, a unit composed largely of Japanese Americans that became the most decorated unit in American history, proving loyalty through blood. 3. Michigan. Michigan was the engine room of the arsenal of democracy. The state's automotive giants stopped making cars entirely to focus on war production, with Ford's Willow Run plant famously churning out one B-24 bomber every hour. By the war's end, Detroit had manufactured 92% of all vehicles used by the US Army, proving that American mass production could overwhelm the Axis powers simply through volume. 2. Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania was the forge of the Allied victory. The steel mills of Pittsburgh ran 24 hours a day, producing more steel than the entire Axis alliance combined. Metal that built ships, tanks, and artillery for the entire free world. The state also paid a heavy price in blood, ranking second in casualties with nearly 27,000 men killed or missing, while its 28th Infantry Division saw such intense combat it earned the nickname the Bloody Bucket. 1. New York. At the very top sits New York. As the most populous state, it mobilized over 1 million men, the only state to break the 7-figure mark, and suffered the highest death toll with over 31,000 casualties. It was the financial heart of the war, funding the fight through massive bond drives, while its factories produced everything from delicate bomb sites to aircraft carriers. For millions of soldiers, the Port of New York was the primary embarkation point, making the Statue of Liberty their final image of home before the war. The victory in World War II was a union of local sacrifices. It was built on the wheat from Kansas, the uranium from Tennessee, the ships from Oregon, and the capital from New York. When we look at the map of 1945, we see a massive, synchronized machine where 48 distinct economies and populations dedicated themselves to a single shared purpose. The United States became the superpower of the 20th century because every state, large and small, played its specific part in the anatomy of total mobilization. Anyways guys, if you have a different ranking, let us know in the comments section below, because this can be a little bit subjective, but regardless, I hope you enjoyed and I hope you learned something new.